All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for all of you joining today to discuss about the topic on the Global Peace Index based on the 2023 report that just came out as of recently. And let me introduce myself. I'm James. I'm from the United States. I'm currently in the United States, and I decided to hold this webinar event to discuss where the peace index, where everything is currently standing is right now. To give you a brief overview, of course, Institute for Economics and Peace, what they're typically do is to make sure that they do a lot of evaluation and a lot of research dedicated independent nonprofit research that actually deals with understanding the key drivers of the peace, as well as to identify where things are standing, not only on peace, but also the economic benefits and everything associated with to trying to improve the peace that could potentially uh, would benefit for not only in one country, like in, let's say, in Asia or elsewhere in the world, but also is trying to make sure that we could find ways to improve those type of ways to improve the peace index by itself. That's what's going to be discussed today. Um, Part of the Institute of Economics and Peace, the organization itself, they obviously had a huge number of I would say not only good established reports, but there also have been gaining a lot of international media attention, as well as the social media and the country's audience by itself. As you could see, the numbers, it actually just grew over every year. Based on the latest numbers, it keeps going up to 40 billions of people are actually getting a lot of awareness based on these IEP established reports. Social media, of course, is keep continuing to rise over the last 7 years. I was actually an IEP ambassador here, and these numbers are continuing to traject to actually to go up. And increasingly, there has been gaining a lot of international media attention. And also there has been establishment about 10 published reports in the past 10 years already, right? And about many researchers have been very interested on these IEP established report that was coming from OECD, Commonwealth, World Bank, uh, all of this institute that everyone is familiar with are actually gaining traction because of these uh, well-known reports that have been established by the IEP, the Institute for Economics of Peace, and has been used all over the world, including from research to universities, as well as many other institutes that we all know of through international area. Now, I will say we'll discuss about where things are standing by based on the key indicators. So how the Global Peace Index indicators, how they do it, is based on these measures. So they measure based on the ongoing domestic and international conflict. That's based on six type of indicators. That's from organizing how intense it is for the internal conflict that is going on, what we see in Russia and Ukraine conflict, as well as Israel-Palestine conflict, as well as other potential key areas that might potentially will pose a conflict in the near future, if any of these are imminent in the next couple of years or in the future years. That includes um, the measures of societal safety and security. So what does that mean is if there's any potential ongoing conflict that is about to happen, typically the Global Peace Index, they obviously use those indicators to not only to use proactive messaging to alert the individual as a citizen in the grassroots level, but also in the international level through an organization like I mentioned, the UN and other international organizations that we're very familiar with to trying to send an ongoing message that these are the areas that we may have to focus on. These are the areas that the countries need to focus on in order to reduce the conflict, as well as to trying to increase the expansion of the peace uh, for future peace and prosperity for those countries who are kind of struggling with it, as well as to measure the militarization, whether there's a potential possibility that the country might face uh, not only an ongoing conflict, but also is there a potential possibility that it's going to be a failed state or authoritarianism, as well as possibility that a country also might do any type of criminal activity that can be transnational crime or terrorism, or potentially a nuclear proliferation like we see in a rogue state like North Korea, Iran, Cuba, and including Russia, as well as other countries might potentially would be part of that type of group that might will lead to those type of conflict. As of right now, where everything is standing, not really good. Right, as of right now, of course, if you look at the global state of peace right now, it's starting to get a lot more deteriorated. The first thing I did saw this deterioration, including the United States, is starting to get really, really obviously not in a good situation in my country, including Latin America. Anywhere you see this map is starting to get deteriorated a lot. That's including parts of Europe. You're starting to see a lot of parts of light shaded green. What does that mean is that they're almost getting close to getting to the point where the United States is about to face for the global state of peace, and that's not even a good thing, because in order to remain peace and prosper, obviously the democracy has to get functioning correctly, or in this case, has to get um, the civil society also needs to get involved with them. But unfortunately, because we're starting to see a lot of civil societies starting to take back from democracy. So what I mean by that is they're disengaged with the basic functions of democracy, whether that's voting or potentially running for a public office, or disengagement because various amount of regulation or policies that make it much tougher uh, to participate in a democracy, and all of the things that I've outlined based on what I'm talking about on the democracy and the basic importance of the voting and other things that we obviously take it for granted. So there's been 84 improvements, but at the same time, there has been 79 deterioration. And overall, they're saying there has been some slight improvement, but still we're seeing a lot of deterioration over the based on from last year's report. And that's it's kind of alarming, because if you see in the next slide, the reality of why these improvements are driven by changes is based on the terrorism impact that we've seen elsewhere, like in the world, as well as engagement in political terror based on those scales, as well as the military expenditures. They're saying all of this is driven by the changes, but sometimes I actually disagree on how they measure, or the methodology, or how they do these based on how the research is done. Some of them I'm kind of skeptical about it. I don't use this entirely to actually assess where the things are. Some of them actually I may have to look at other research and reports in order to determine whether things are getting so bad to the point that uh it's getting not getting improvement. As well as the deterioration, what we're seeing is primarily driven by change. How they do it is based on the external conflicts, as well as political instability, and those who have been uh and those who have been part of the deaths for the internal conflict, meaning people who have actually been killed because of suppression, um, death campaign, as well as any other types of forms to kill its own citizen because it's from the government or its internal group conflict, by meaning ethnic groups or militarily. They use a lot of different methods and tools in order to to trying to obviously driven by these conflict as well as deterioration of the state itself. So as you see, this is a 13th deterioration in the last 15 years by 0.42%. Now, you may think that number is small, but it can be even larger depending on the limitation of the data, what we see right now. But they're saying 84 countries have become more peaceful, 79 countries have been deteriorated, which is kind of, I would say, much skeptical because those numbers should have been obviously been more deteriorated than if it was peaceful. So where the things are standing at right now, they're saying continuously we see Iceland remains as the most peaceful country in the world. Now, I kind of disagree in somewhat on this because last year Iceland actually had the biggest protests, especially from women, because there has been a lack of women empowerment and women rights that was happening as of last year, and they actually had a large huge national protest to give the women to right to now it's not the right to vote, but it's actually giving more workers rights to women for those who have not enjoyed because they're actually having some difficulties in the workplace because of the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. And even though they're saying that their Middle East and North Africa has been improved significantly in the last 3 consecutive years, um, there are still some imminent internal conflict that is still going on even after the Arab Spring, which you saw a lot of uh, waves of trying to, I would say, they're trying to obviously go for the democracy as well as they're trying to figure out ways to improve it, but they have been struggling on that since it's been almost 10 years since the Arab Spring has been begun. And because of lack of transition, because they're unable to improve the democracy itself, that could potentially would spur other conflicts in the region, which that is a concern for anyone out there who is obviously if the neighboring countries would also face some similar to the internal conflict. They are saying Libya and Burundi have the largest improvement, which again, I'm kind of critical about this because Libya and Burundi, they're obviously they're unable to transition into full democracy or went back to where it was. And I think even though it says the Europe remains the most peaceful region, they said there's a slight improvement, but there also have been internal conflicts within the far right movement as well as the internal political polarizations happening in Europe, but also in other countries around the world. They're experiencing that because of various amount of factors that went into it, whether that's political polarization or internal conflict, external conflict, as well as any other elsewhere. Oops, sorry. So right now, what the report is saying, at least the good thing about is that one thing I could take away is that Afghanistan right now is still remains the world's least peaceful nation. They're saying, um, but it's the funny thing is recorded one of the largest increases in peacefulness, which is like okay, this is kind of contradictory because and disillusion because how obviously even though Afghanistan right now has been controlled by the Taliban after the withdrawal of Afghanistan from the United States in 2021, they're still having some difficulties trying to transition into the peaceful nation, even though there has been a lot of difficulties facing the Afghanistan for the future of Afghanistan, whether that's education, because women obviously are having some difficulties right now trying to get the girls back into the education, go back to school. But Taliban actually now reinstated the policy that just happened before even the United States actually invaded Afghanistan and took control of that region. And now they decided to go back to doing old ways of doing it. Uh, Conflict deaths obviously kept continuing to increase by 96%, and we're starting to see a lot of deterioration in Russia and Eurasia. That's from Russia, Ukraine, from Central Asia to some parts of the border of Europe. Obviously, we're starting to see some regional deterioration as overall in the region. At least we also know that 609 GPI regions have recorded deterioration as well. Um, This is just to give a brief overview of where the 10 most peaceful country is. again, you don't actually have to agree or disagree based on what the report is saying, but this is based on what the IEP report is coming from. And these are the least peaceful countries based on the rankings from each different 10 countries that we see. Um, and obviously, what we continue to see, they're saying there has been some improvements. Again, obviously, Libya, Cote d'Ivoire, and Oman, Afghanistan, and Burundi, they're saying there has been some improvements. So if you look at the rankings right now, they're still far away from even the top 20s or top 30s to actually to say they have improved. I think what they're trying to say improve is, I think the measure is trying to say that they were kind of in the worst situation on the peaceful index in the past, but they're starting to improve it. And I think this is what they're trying to say on their research methodology. And even though the numbers have been slightly going up, but it's still, there's a lot more work to do based on the index I've been trying to deal with in regard to democracy. As you know, obviously, five most deteriorated countries, these are obviously relevant, of course, Israel, Ukraine, Mali, Haiti. Of course, right now, Haiti is also is in a bad shape right now because of internal conflict of what's going on in violence in Haiti, and gang leaders happen to control the city, which that's obviously not a good news because the neighboring countries like Dominican Republic and elsewhere within the Caribbean countries, they might potentially also face a regional conflict if this spurs out of control without checks and balances within the government, which you saw Prime Minister have been resigned right after he actually fled the country, and as well as Israel starting to get deteriorated because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which Benjamin Netanyahu obviously continuously increases power um, to obviously to say that this war is legitimate. I want your vote, making sure that he should persuade people to say that he is doing the right thing. But we all know that he is not. And his public support is gaining a lot of deterioration over the past 9 months, ever since he started the war on October the 7th attack that just happened last year. Russia, of course, we already know that obviously it's going to deteriorate continuously because of the presidential election just happened just yesterday or a day before, when Russian Vladimir Putin, once again, he got another 5-year term, which I think he's going to continuously going to be in power for the rest of the entire life, even our lifetime when we're still alive. Nothing's going to change unless he dies, but I rarely think he's not going to. That's same thing for China. That's also same thing in other parts of the region as well. If they're experiencing some military authoritarianism and increasing their power and their will to try to increase their legitimacy. So the next thing we're going to look at is where the trends are going to be at. Right now, as of peacefulness since 2008, the last time that they actually did the report, again, I think I could agree that everyone here could agree there has been some decline in peacefulness within the 13 out of 15 years, based on from what they gathered the data started 2008 all the way to now. There has been a lot of deterioration. That has been increasingly becoming more problematic. Even though they say there's some 97 countries have been deteriorated, there were some improvements, but I think that still requires a lot of work to do. And the measurement based on the piece over the last 15 years, again, it's still, we're starting to see that militarization is the domain to improve it, which it's hard to say whether military is the answer to the solution to trying to bring peace for their own country. And even though they're saying that ongoing conflict has deteriorated since 2010, there are still ongoing conflicts within the internally and external, as well as also a huge public safety concern, because if the safety and security are not there, and if militarization continue to increase, but at the same time, if the ongoing conflict is also increasing, that would be a recipe for the country to actually use it for other methods, um, whether that is what we saw in Haiti. The real reason why violent gangs actually were been present at the time is because I actually watched the news reports where actually that they got the weapons, and what we noticed was that they tracked down where there has been a lot of weapons smuggling within the region coming from the Americas, which is I'm really shocked. But at the same time, those inspectors who actually inspect the weapons, meaning the where the internal security is supposed to happen, and they need to make sure that the weapons does not leave the dock or in the bay area. In this case, because of shortages of public security, what we're experiencing right now, they could not even deal with all this demand of increasing demand of work, that they make sure that they catch people to avoid this criminal behavior, but at the same time trying to maintain a peaceful region in order to bring the security. And so because of lack of personnel and shortages, they are unable to deal with it. That further intentionally increases the violent crimes, but also other transnational crimes within the region and elsewhere. These are the changes in indicator score from 2008 to 2023, since the last time when they did it. Again, there has been more violence than ever before, than if it was armed security and peaceful, what we see on the map, which I totally agree that you see a lot of different methods are increasing, from external conflict, internal, those who have been died because of internal conflict, whether it's violent demonstration, military suppression campaign, as well as other organized criminal activities are starting to appear and emerge from various countries, including neighboring countries. Political instability, like I mentioned, it was part of that real reason why the democracy is starting to fail, because lack of participation with the democracy, because many people are thinking that what's the point of me of voting for, I don't know, Trump or Biden, if obviously if they're not going to do something for the people, or if there's no change to democracy or democratic system, if I don't get a benefit of from the policymaking, whether that's climate change or economic, or basically abortion, if these things are don't benefit me to actually to improve our lives, what's the point of voting it? That's what there's in the situation right now, and that only further increases the amount of skepticism, as well as other type of concerns that obviously might raise for the people, and that's why we're starting to see a lot of decay in the institution. Now, I'm not saying democracy is not the answer to, it's just saying that it's democracy is over. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that we gotta have to obviously push harder in order to try and protect democracy, and to make sure that we need to find new ways of doing things in order to make sure that we give hope for the future generation, as well as our generation and in previous generation. We have to demonstrate that, but it's going to take a while in order to do that, to make some improvements in democracy. Right now, obviously, the total battle deaths, I mean, there's nothing much I could say about this, except there has been an increasing amount of deaths in the battlefield because of wars from Ethiopia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. We're starting to see that increasing trend and emerging a lot on these internal external conflict. More countries are starting to involve. There has been an increasing amount of conflicts within the region that continues to grow over the past 15 years, which is not really good. For specific region, the only thing I could say is that obviously there has been internally increasing conflict within, based on the GPI score that they gathered from 2008 to 2023 right now. They're saying West African countries have been recording improvement, but I doubt that, because I don't know how they measure these, but the data is still limited. There has been some increasing deteriorating, but then again, at the same time, where they're saying about the improvements, I think they're confusing the public of where the improvements are, because I still see African nations are still having some issues because of internal conflict, because of external conflict, because of past historical imperialism that they experienced during the colonization from previous generations, as well as there has been also increasingly from terrorism, that obviously because of Boko Haram and other terrorist organization that we continue to see right now, is becoming increasingly becoming a problematic, as we are now in the Sahel region. We're starting to see a lot of emergence coming from there, as well as actual election disruption. We're also starting to appear because of previous presidential election, as well as any other local elections coming in. There has been a lot of disruption in the Africa region. They were trying to figure out a way to game the system where they're thinking that the leader who's in power right now, they'll continuously serve for his own people, which I doubt it. But that's obviously becoming a huge problematic right now. The economic value piece. So what it is that obviously there has been increase. So what I'm going to say about the economic impact of violence is that based on about 2 years ago, I think again the time is lacking based on how they did this report. If they got from last year, we could get it precisely and accurately. But right now, the economic impact of violence, it will be shocking for you to say it cost about $17.5 trillion for the entire world. That is almost equivalent about $2,200 in US dollars in person to engage in violence, but at the same time got impacted because there's been no economic activities. And if the world actually get a decrease in violence by 10%, more likely they could use those budget to actually to fund for economic development, political development, as well as to increase the efficiency of the country itself to lead the democratic values and norms that we have been believing for years, to try to increase the education so that way children could get a good education, so that way they could get good jobs, good working environments, better climate efficiency and real resilience, as well as trying to protect women empowerment, to trying to make sure that they also could have the same opportunity. If the economic impact of violence was not the issue, meaning if it wasn't the problem, then most of the majority of these funds would have been obviously gone to the positive things, like I mentioned. So that's the stark statistics that you saw. Again, the breakdown where the economic impact of violence is coming from, again, like I said, military internal security expenditures are actually combined a total of 75% that led to this impact of violence. You see the military, again, like I said, this is one of the biggest areas why this conflict never ends, because of the violence. And that is one of the reasons why sometimes we may have to scale down military expenditures, so that way we could use that to try to improve the public security and use towards those funds for economic development, education, political development, trying to improve ways to find new ways to improve the country itself for better future and better for future generations. Again, those are the areas where actually we see composition, economic impact by region. Across from the board, I think the most conflict that we see, the armed conflict, as well in interpersonal violence, whether that's violent crimes, gangs, or any type of, like, that's including human trafficking as well as uh drug trafficking. That's also included as interpersonal violence, because they're selling smuggle those items to their respective countries, and we're starting to see increasing amount of these violence what we see in the region, particularly in Central America, Caribbean, as we all know, South America, Sub-Saharan Africa. I have talked with a lot of this region, and they keep telling me that obviously they're fleeing the region because their government does not take care of its own people. Simple explanation. When the government does not take responsibility and accountability for their own action to figure out what the root cause is, which I know, but what's the frustration is why they're actually moving, why they're fleeing from their own country to the point that they need to solve the issue, but unfortunately they couldn't because the government does not take care of its own people. That's the problem. But obviously, we're starting to see a lot of increasing military expenditures across the region because of external conflict. So the next thing that kind of goes transition is about Taiwan. For the very first time, they're starting to talk about Taiwan, that potentially could be a potential internal conflict. At the same time, there will be external conflict if things are going out of control. As we all know, if China does get into conflict or potential internal conflict, which that might potentially maybe is going to happen based on the analysis, what we hear. But I don't want to believe this is going to, but I don't want to believe that obviously this is going to happen, but we gotta have to prepare for the worst case scenario if this is going to happen, because it will obviously decrease the entire world economic global impact by almost $2.7 trillion in the first year, or about 2.8% global GDP if the war is about to happen. Um, that also obviously will result double the loss of economic activity if this is going to happen. It could be worse than 2008 global financial crisis that we experienced. It's not because economic deterioration, it was because of this war. And we already know that Russia, Ukraine, and then Israel, Palestine, it already disrupted the world markets, from energy market to various natural resources, raw materials like rubber, timber, and all of that totally disrupted the supply chain entirely. If this was the reality, then at least Chinese economy is going to go into a big it's going to be under shipwreck. It's going to be underwater. But right now, China's economy is not in a good shape right now because of rapid deflation, as well as the housing market. It got busted really, really bad because of regulation, but also other factors that were implemented because of overconsumption, overspending, and over speculation. But also, it's not only China's economy, it's also going to impact Taiwan's economy by almost 40% if the war is going to happen. As well as we know, Taiwan produces 92% of this world's advanced largest semiconductor chips, like the TSMC. They were trying to figure out they want to move out of the Taiwan because they might potentially will face a internal conflict. And that's why they moved it to Japan, or they also increased investment in here in the United States and Arizona, where they're actually trying to build in order to get away from the internal conflict, the bad things were to happen in the worst case scenario. Again, the largest trading partner, again, I think this is why we should never forget that some of you are about to leave, but you could just go ahead and do so. But we cannot ignore that China is going to be the biggest trading partners among them, as well as highly integrated economic militarily. If we're saying if the trade war is going to happen with the Trump administration, well, guess what? That will not only exacerbate the supply chain shortage that we're experiencing, that also increasing external conflict. If he does that, not only it's going to increase the tariffs, which might hurt way more on the inflation, but he's making it more damage. And I think this is another repeat what we saw in the Second World War, what led to the conflict, because other countries are going to retaliate. And if you look at it here, United States is the highest trading partner, largest trading partner, but also Japan, Korea, as well as other countries, they're also the biggest trading partners within China. And if we ignore China, then unfortunately that's going to be a much more detrimental conflict, but also a lot of economic loss of benefits. Um, we have a 2-minute time frame. Here's what I'm going to do. After I'm finished with this slide, we'll actually have to relog back in. So all of you 3 or 4 people out there who are still joining us right now, if you could, can you guys obviously rejoin the Zoom link that or the schedule invitation I sent, rejoin that link again, and I'll let you guys end back in. Is that good? I mean, you could just send, just put it on the message, and and we'll be re-entering back in the room. But what I'm trying to say is the war in Ukraine, as a result of it, there has been an increasing amount of deaths in the battlefield. So based on work increasing suggestion, based on recent estimate, that there have been 83,000 people were killed in the conflict as of in 2022. Now, most majority of deaths are coming from younger people, especially Ukrainian men ages 19 to 24, as a result of conflict. Some of them were killed, some of them actually had to fly the country, but unfortunately they got killed by the military soldiers, in this case from Russia, and so on and so forth. I think we're about to run out of time right now. It's going to kick us out, but I'm going to stop the sharing and stop the All right, so picking up where we left off. Again, like I said, there has been an increasing amount of deaths that we see in the battlefield. Again, most of the majority of them are coming from Ukrainian men, ages 19 to 24. They had to dodge the draft when Russian President Vladimir Putin made an announcement that you guys obviously, for anyone who's 19 to 24, you guys actually have to get your butt into the conflict or battlefield, and so basically we're gonna have to send you that over there. Fabio was mentioning if you're sharing the slide or both a video recording because the slides are. I will actually have to get in touch with the IEP and see if this is appropriate or not, because I'm not the one who actually did the slide, but basically IEP actually provided this resource to me in order to lead the conversation, so that way they're the ones who could send that approval. But I will let the IEP know what the appropriate action is going to be since I need to get an approval from them. But anyway, so increasingly we're starting to see a lot of conflict and violence. Obviously, what we see the estimate right now, I think it can be underreported. The data is very still limited that obviously we have no idea if the conflict deaths are actually increasing more rapidly than if it was what we see in an estimate. They said estimate. It's not accurate. So because of limited lack of technological innovation and lack of technological resources that we see in Ukraine, even though the US actually provided support on the Starlink from Tesla, Elon Musk, even though I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, if he actually did send them there. But but anyway, I think that's one of the real reason why there has been a huge problem within the conflict with Ukraine. So the total economic value of the impact of Ukraine was actually increased by $449 billion, which is substantially increase as of last year to about 479%, which that's equate to at least 63% of the total GDP. I mean, this is very much similar to what we saw in the previous statistics and previous studies that we saw the global impact of what if the conflict continues to last forever. Ukraine, obviously, what we're seeing based on because of the result of the Dutch draft, military draft, in this case, because of the orders under President Putin, what we're continuous to see is that men are starting to leave the country. The real reason why is because they don't want to believe in that why conflict is necessary in order to obviously get the things what they wanted. I still don't understand why Putin is trying to increase his power and flex his muscles to try to say that we're powerful Russia. And in order to do that, he demonstrated that he's going to be so ambitious and so greedy enough that he said this is going to work. But unfortunately, we know as of right now that has not worked because some of the men from Russia are actually getting starving on the battlefield. At the same time, he doesn't know what he is doing. So that's why even when we see both of the genders actually leaving the population like entirely, you see the negative numbers. That's basically a lot of people are leaving out of the Ukraine, both male and females. But they're saying that males are actually the increasing large mass majority of the population starting to leave in Ukraine because of military draft. I also want to say this. There's one country is also has been on the news recently, and that is Myanmar. Myanmar recently got an official order from the military government, is still under military government right now. And even though I had to contact with a friend, obviously, who lives there, he said that he's about to leave the Myanmar and he's gonna dodge the draft because he doesn't believe why his country's military government decided that this is the appropriate way to do in order to lead the country. Why obviously men actually have to serve in the military draft, obviously, even though this is not appropriate. So what they're saying is the government didn't have to consent to tell the will of the people saying why we have to go to war. It's kind of like that statement. But that's why it's unfortunate that obviously males are also impacting as well as women altogether because of ongoing trends in conflict. I really wish that obviously there could be at least good news, but unfortunately, there is a lot of continuously bad news right now, and I don't know how long this is gonna last. But the more internal conflicts and external conflicts continue to rapidly increase at a time when everything else is also challenging and also impacting our economy, our education, as well as uh, within governance, there obviously this violence is obviously increasing. It's going to settle within Ethiopia, Mali, Myanmar, and Ukraine, which happened in 2022 when all of this military campaign and as well as military takeover within the government, they decided that this is the best thing for them to do. But unfortunately, the people are not consenting, or they're saying they don't approve this. But they're saying that there's a drop significantly in Afghanistan and Yemen, which I disagree because there's still conflicts is still internally happening within the country. As we know, obviously there's been a more conflict deaths in Ethiopia as well than Ukraine. But here's the statistics, which is I'm not skeptical about it, but here's the thing. Regardless of whichever country you're from, everyone is facing the similar consequences, whether that's deaths in the battlefield because of wars or potentially deaths from the violence campaign from, whether that's military or the government or just internal gains just itself. What's going on in Haiti? What's going on in Myanmar? What's going on in other countries of the world? You betcha that obviously there's obviously internal conflict, but at the same time, there's a lot of violent criminal activities going on. Like I mentioned, drug trafficking, human trafficking, as well as weapons trafficking, or there's a lot of increase in smuggling. And when there's a lack of public security, obviously that's also U.S. responsibility as well. Because of lack of workers, obviously they cannot obviously do the proper inspection, whether that's at the airport, whether that's at the ship dock, whether that is coming from any other place, including airlines. Obviously, when they obviously inspect it, because of lack of people, they couldn't obviously do the proper inspection. And when that happens, more likely they're taking advantage because of increasing demand of people are not willing to work, but at the same time, that's also has to do with other type of issue why obviously the young generation are not willing to work or various ways. But here's the thing, obviously, when the organization fails to actually to listen to its people, that is where more challenge is about to grow itself. And that is the real reason why, if even though it's like coming from the private sector, where obviously they don't understand the workers' compensation or understand the workers' empathy of what they're going through, when an organization or a company does not listen to its own people, that's where the emerging trends comes in, where the conflict continues to persist. And that's why obviously there has been a more internationalized conflict. Again, there has been an increase in intrastate. So what they mean by intrastate is border countries, neighboring countries. So if you're saying China, for example, Taiwan could be obviously facing a threat from internal conflict because of China's aggression. That also does not say that obviously Korea, North Korea, and Japan are free from this conflict. They're also going to potentially will face a lot of aggression. So that's why they're increasing the military muscles and their expenditures as of in the last 2 years when Biden was trying to implement that. Uh, I totally forgot what was that pact. The If any of you obviously from Asia obviously know about it, just please obviously put it under chat because I mean my brains are obviously been overloaded with the information. I tried to memorize it, but unfortunately I'm out of whack right now. Um, but anyway, but what I'm trying to say is there's an internal increase in conflict as well as the intrastate within neighboring countries, um, within in the conflict itself. Ethiopia. So I think I'm not sure if it's Ethiopia. If I remember, it's they call it the country of North Korea, which I think it is. But just correct me on the chat if you are. But uh, there has been an increase in conflict within Ethiopia because of military suppression, as well as they totally had a media blackout. What they meaning is they shut down the internet and they also shut down the media because trying to verify how much amount of people are killed in the battlefield, which again, there has been suggested estimate about 500,000 people actually died because of lack of humanitarian aid. Because they close off the border, they close off the country, they are totally isolated, just like North Korea does. We cannot obviously understand how much amount of devastating impacts is coming in from Ethiopia or other countries that are experiencing because of lack of information access. Lack of accessibility, lack of information. Do you know what that obviously equates to? It's basically we have no idea. There's no way we could bring a humanitarian aid without understanding the number of population that are impacted. Because if we don't have those information, well, guess what? How can we know? Obviously, how do we know how many people are starving or suffering? And we have to send in aid, but we cannot tell obviously how many people are suffering because of result of conflict. So there's needs an increasing openness, and there needs to be increase in open information sharing to the public, that there needs to be obviously a collaboration. But unfortunately, they're obviously they're saying I'm not going to collaborate with you because obviously what's the point? Obviously, why do you obviously have to pay attention more on me instead? Why don't you pay attention to yourself? It's kind of like saying what the government is trying to say in Ethiopia, but also other countries who are believing in nationalistic governance, which that didn't work. Obviously, what we saw in the Second World War. But obviously, again, this surge in violence obviously has led to a large increase amount of violence that is targeted at civilians, like I mentioned. And if there is an increased amount of violence, increased amount of trafficking, whether it's weapons or humans or drugs, I mean, I'll tell you, several Asian countries are their government is already screwed up because they're saying they're going to do a military suppression campaign among those who do illegal drugs. And I think they did the priorities wrong because if their priority is just trying to catch all the people, good luck with that. The real reason I'm kind of smiling right now is because I'm laughing about it is because they obviously didn't do the right thing. Because they're just going after people obviously who doesn't have a criminal record on their thing, and that obviously potentially would strip away their own future opportunities where they could get jobs. And in this case, they got in jail because the military suppression campaign by the government have told them that they're obviously were part of the illegal system. Technically, they're not. They just got the wrong people. They're out of the wrong hands. But again, Myanmar have obviously been intensified and started to get more violent conflict because the military does not openly try to have a discussion with its own civilians, with its own people. I will tell you this, that obviously Afghanistan, of course, it says has fallen dramatically. I disagree with this. I don't know how they did this research, but I will tell you, even though they're saying that conflict is over, U.S. troop withdrawal after the I think it's September of 2021, there's still imminent of conflict related deaths because of Taliban that took it over. But I will tell you this, that I think there has been a lot of things that's been going on recently. Of course, I mean, so if I think this is probably the end of the slide, what I could tell. But I do want to say that the Institute of Economic and Peace right now, they're trying to push it really hard to try to make sure that this report is getting out of the public and everything, which is I'm recording as well as for those who can attend it because of various reasons. I understand that. I'm trying to be flexible and open to those concerns and everything. But what I'm trying to say is that even though IEP does have a strategy or have a generalized outline of what things are going on right now, like I mentioned several times, this is not enough to actually just say we could stop the conflict. Even though the numbers say in a stark contrast in the numbers that is so high to the point that what we're going to do about it, the one easiest solution is to share this knowledge, share this to any countries around the world that you feel that have not heard about it. The media only can do its job for the masses, meaning and everybody watches this news, but that requires a lot of dedication and effort because they have to do through different medium channels, whether that's from social media, YouTube, or various amount of sources that they have to spread it out there in order to make sure that they get the information what they needs to. But that's going to take a while, that's not going to take a really, really quickly because it takes a lot of effort for these creators to actually produce content, get the content out there, and to make sure that it's been posted right away. But as we all know, we have personal shortage in the job market, and right now, they don't have the time to actually. They have a less amount of time to actually to make sure everything goes fast producing results right now because they don't have the people. But I was saying that I have the ability to change the impact for positive. Instead, obviously, instead of not doing anything about it, that's why I get involved with IEP. And I've been working for them for at least over a decade right now, after I did this presentation for a while. Ever since then, the reports, there has been going ups and downs and positive and negatives, but right now it's been gone worst since the last time I did this presentation after last year. And that's the problem. I think this right now, from what I could assess, is that if these don't improve, and the things I'll outline is not going to improve, if war continues to be the solution to the answer in order to get the legitimacy and everything, then I don't know what to tell you. I have no words to tell, but I would like to say that I want the military government and authoritarian government to get out of its own way, to say that obviously if they're saying that military power and a hard power in this case, they're saying they want to show off to other countries how powerful they are, which I have nothing to say about that, because peace obviously can be shared really much powerful in the masses from cultures, sharing the information exchange, but at the same time sharing cultures and knowledge. That's what's going to get the people to get motivated to improve the democracy and as the institution as a whole in the country. I would say that's the positive thing that could get out of this mess. But when the institution get undermined, when they is a lack of trust within among the public because things are not working as it should be, I do understand their perspective, but at the same time, that does not mean that they should not do anything about it. And I think this is also individual responsibility also to blame on it, because they're just thinking obviously, oh, obviously democracy not working. Fine. Then we're just gonna throw in authoritarianism and see what's gonna happen. Or people are gonna look at backwards, which things didn't go very well, because what we saw in an election right now this year, as all of you know, that we have a super election here this year. There's every election happening across the corner around the world right now. I'm not, I would say concerned, but at the same time, I'm kind of monitoring it right now. I would tell you, if the people are not willing to take it seriously on the democracy, or they're just saying that, look, democracy, look, it has been failed, globalization has failed. Who obviously, why would I care? It's kind of like saying that statement. I think a lot of people have. That type of mindset is what gets us into big, very trouble. But at the same time, that's going to lead to a lot of conflict when people are skeptical too much to believe that the system has not worked. But at the same time, who to blame? They always blame it to the government, but who is also to blame? Individuals. So without getting involved on it, I don't think they have nothing to say about it. Except for me, I have something to say about it, because obviously the reports keep saying that there has been internal conflict, but nothing is getting improved. And even though I do this presentation in order to get informed the public for the right purposes, that is not enough for me to obviously to share that knowledge. It's up to the individual, or for those who are attending here. It's all of your responsibility to make sure that this word is get out into the public. And the reality is, if that's not being done, or if we don't increase the raise awareness to the public, whether that is from education or schools, churches, or anywhere else out there, that of within your own networks and connections, well, then things are not gonna be returned to normal. I do want to say last thing before I end this conversation. I think democracy has been taken way too granted. That's including society, that's including culture, that's also including economically. When those are taken for granted, somebody out there is going to fill that gap. By what I mean by that is somebody's going to take advantage of the system saying, oh, look, democracy has now been worked. Well, guess what? Authoritarian is the best answer. Let's go back to the old days. Really? Well, guess what? After I saw Trump when he got elected and the last 4 years, which is not enough to say, but what I could say is he did obviously didn't improve the situation. If he's going to elect in 2024 this year, it's another Trump and Biden rematch. Either regardless, here's one thing I could say about that. Either regardless, whichever candidate wins, it's still not going to improve. Biden, I gave him a chance, but then unfortunately, he's not taking it seriously to the point that he's going to modernize the economy, even though he is trying to say he is, but it's just there hasn't been any improvements or benefits within our own country. I mean, I do see a lot of transportation and all of that is starting to come in and, it's benefiting the economy, but not to the point that it's not getting a greater positive impact with his own citizen. If Trump gets elected, like I mentioned earlier, if he's going to elect it, he's going to raise the tariffs on trade war. And if he does that, it's going to make it more worse, especially with living condition, with the inflation. That's not happening in China. China is definitely also going to retaliate it. The same thing what happened during his administration. And then that's going to get exacerbated the spiral out of control of the price uh on the prices of food and shelter and water and all of that. That's going to potentially is going to get worse. So the more alarmed they're going to be, the more I will raise awareness about this. And I want everyone to take it seriously. I want your community to know about this so that way they could prepare proactively if in case worst case scenario is going to happen. That does not mean obviously just go to other countries and do that unless obviously it depends on the situation, what everybody's, what their motive is. But what I'm trying to say is if you want to improve the situation, take an effort. At the same time, it will be a hard work. I would say fighting for democracy and human rights and other issues that I'm fighting for right now, it's been 10 years. I started my activism since in 2014. Um, when South Korea was under authoritarianism, literally at the time when conservative government didn't take any action because of Seoul Ferry tragedy that just happened. And I actually spread the movement across my campus in colleges to raise those awareness. That's where I first started my activism. Still, I still care of my own native country, South Korea, for where my parents are from, and I'm keep fighting for it. I think there needs to be an increase of not a recognition like saying on the media, but I think there needs to be more gratitude and more thankful to the point that I'm doing this to trying to protect people from getting a worse situation. So I hope our situation improves, but what I'm seeing is not going to improve. But I think we should not be complacent. We should take responsibility in our own actions in order to make sure that we bring a positive impact within our own community as well as globally. And so I think my takeaways and the conversation I had has been very meaningful to all of you. And I'm hoping obviously this conversation will continue to last within our generation and within our lifetime. I do want to say thank you for everyone to joining. If any of you have a Q&A, obviously question and answers, just obviously please obviously do so right now. So that way we could also spread this word to the public that obviously they might face a similar question and answers. If any of you obviously wanted to unmute your mic or whatever it is, please do so.
Okay, thank you very much for
Yep.
your valid, Mr. James, thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you so much for the session. It was very enlightening and gave us great detail as to the current state of the several conflict zones in the world. We're really pretty much grateful. Although you expressed skepticism about the changes that could bring about positive turnaround for this war-inflicted conflict zones. I believe the extent of the impact of the IEP through the Ambassador Challenge, through the Peace Academy, and other industrious work that the IEP is committed and dedicated to, has a tremendous way of contributing to bringing about peace in the world presently. So yeah, I think despite the skepticism, which are valid, there is also hope at the end of the day. There will be light at the end of the tunnel as well. Yeah, thank you very much.
I do appreciate Afolabi for your own comments. Like I said, I've been doing this for years and decades already right now to spread to spread this awareness. And I do appreciate your thoughtful comments. I think this is why I keep continuing to fight for on my own, as well as other countries who are voiceless. That's why I'm saying this is a long-term project. This is not 1 day or 2 day or 1 year where everything's going to be stopped to put in hold. That's not the point. This is going to be a long-term project. Like I said, I started in 2014 when when things have been going chaos at the time. The year 2014 was the worst year. A lot of internal conflicts as well, increasing military authoritarianism as well as authoritarianism in civilian population, to the point that it might potentially will stifle free speech and the basic human rights that we enjoy based on the Western country's style of constitution, and literally that's been given to us in order to give us the power to keep things in check and responsibility among their own governments. But unfortunately, media is also to blame as well when they obviously present these stuff, especially when they say that democracy has not been worked based on the grabs and chart, which is valid. But at the same time, they should not overdo it or over exaggerate to say that those claims are obviously true or false. So I think every stakeholders, media, private sector, government, international organization, and many others, they need to take the responsibility to make sure that they take their own action and develop that robust conversation and discussion. For me, I cannot be the only one who's fighting for this. Every single stakeholders has to get involved. But if that does not work out, which it might not, then unfortunately we're just not going to end. We're not seeing the end of the light of the tunnel. But I just wish we do more proactive measures and proactive communication to resolve this conflict, in order to improve the country's peaceful, but as well as the everyday lives that we could go back and enjoy our lives, based on what we've been enjoying for the last 20 years of globalization. I mean, right now, globalization is totally over, but I really miss it so heavily. But unfortunately, they cannot take away the people, obviously, based from having this conversation. Even though we're not living the analog years, so I'm talking about tapes or recorders, all of that without this technology. But hey, obviously, the one positive thing I'd like to say is the technological developments. Even though it's generate AI and all this discussion is in the media and the trends and the mainstream, and they're saying how it might potentially would impact the election, disinformation, all that. There are some people who are trying to fight for this problem, and it will take a while. Democracy takes a while. Technology development is going to take a while. I know that, obviously. Everything's going to take a lot of efforts and resources, a lot of dedication, which is what I'm doing right now. That's why I keep continuing to fight for it, even though there are some discouragement that some things will not work. But I don't give up really too easily to the point that I just do not stop on what I believe in and what my values are, and to stop doing what I'm doing. I will continue on this for the rest of my entire life. I will fight for it. At the same time, use technologies to try to bring positive impact, so that way they could increase not only their educational awareness, but as well as to gain own confidence within among the civil society and other stakeholders as well. I think the first thing what we have to do is to build trust. that is what I'm working on across the world right now, trying to figure out how we could obviously improve that positive image at the same time, trying to change the narrative where things are. So that's pretty much it for me. But Christy, obviously, if you're still there, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to do so. You can unmute your mic. But anyway, do any of you have a last minute questions or answers that you want me to say, or we could just end it here? I guess that's all the questions and answers that we have then. I will wait a second. Okay. I do appreciate for every one of you who joined this program, this webinar. And I hope obviously all of you take away from a lot of experiences from our today's webinar. And I do appreciate for all of you coming. I know the time zones are kind of really obviously been difficult and challenges for all of you, especially this is the only time I have, as I also have other arrangements that I have to go to within the Zoom meeting, which, I'm telling you that obviously I'm kind of busy these days with a lot of this presentation all to discuss how we're going to improve the democracy as well as improve society in other areas, key areas, in order to have that robust conversation as well, how we can build trust in the communities and the public. Takes a lot of efforts. And I really do want to say I do appreciate for all of you coming, even though there has been challenges on your internet as well as coming in a late time in your own time zone. I do appreciate it for all of you coming in and taking the time to be part of this robust discussion from this today's webinar. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, I will post this video up to my YouTube channel. I will send all of you email again. In this case, for those people who have not come in today, I'll send a link to my YouTube channel. All of you just subscribe from there, whatever you can, in order to gain access to this video that the video is going to post in the YouTube channel. And please do make sure that to share this knowledge that have been presented to your local community, as well as any connections, networks that you have, please do share with them, because this is important that, like I said, this is the important discussion that we could deal with, as well as to build a momentum within the positive movement, as well as positive experiences, that we could say that things are about to change, but it takes a lot of efforts and teamwork in order to deal with that type of challenges that I presented into today's Institute of Economic Peace Research and their own methodology that I presented as of today. And like I said, I do appreciate all of you coming in. We'll obviously end this meeting, and in this call, I will stop sharing the screen. I do appreciate for those who have been joining us today, and I'm hoping I'll present another type of this webinar. There's two more reports that I may have to show it to you. But if all of you are interested, I will send that follow-up email to that as well. And I will obviously hope that I will see all of you again in the same in the same Zoom meeting. And yeah, I will send that form all of you to attend that next webinar. So please stay tuned for that, and hope obviously all of you have a good rest of your day, night, evening, or wherever you are in the world. I do appreciate for all of you coming as well. Thank you very much, and I'll end this meeting.